As I said there, this is the very last event of our 10 Days of Data series, which I imagine some of you have been involved in throughout September and October. And those 10 events are really about exploring the value of data right across your business. And the innovation showcase is kind of more of the tools and techniques and the things you can really do to really sort of increase the way you can use it. And we've got a really exciting sort of final event lined up for you. But we're going to kick off today with two speakers from 3C, who have actually been our headline sponsor for the whole of the 10 Days of Data series. So thank you very much to 3C. They are a leading independent technology and data consultancy who really do focus on the UK social housing sector. They support organisations to optimise the benefits of technology and data in achieving their strategic ambitions. And I know they're going to have some really exciting stuff to talk about today. So without any further ado, I will hand over to Nicky and Colin. Colin is the CEO, Colin Sales, CEO of 3C, and Nicky Hawkins, who is the head of data services. And as some of you just got a little bit of before, they'll be talking to you about why data is the new air and why that's important to business. So over to you, Colin and Nicky. Thank you.
Hi, okay, well, I'm going to kick off today. So hello to everyone. I'm going to now share my first slide. Lovely. Okay. So just very quickly, for those of you who don't know 3C, we're, as already said, we're a leading provider of IT consultancy, specifically to the social housing sector. And these are just some of our customers from the last 12 months, and they literally stretch the length and breadth of the UK and Ireland. So it gives you a feel for who we are. If we actually look at what we're talking about today, which is really how the shift is changing in social housing to what we mean when we say IT. If I was to say to you all, what do you think of when you think of IT? You'll probably say to me computers, maybe software, and that's because the T has absolutely hijacked the word. If we know what it means information technology, but for some reason, whenever we're thinking of IT now, we tend to think of those enablers of information rather than the information itself, and that's a fundamental flaw in the way in which we've been thinking about IT. So we're going to explore that today. I think that I'm right in saying that probably no one has kind of worked it out more than the government now, that really, if we're going to be a leading provider in the world of services and a leading kind of GA organisation country, we're going to need to get our act together in this whole area of data. This is a heading or a headline that was provided recently by the government when they were talking about the National Health Service, and they've coined it "Data is the New Air." Now, many of you have probably heard the old title, or old headline, which was "Data is the New Oil," and that effectively meant that data was now being considered the most valuable resource of the 21st century, whereas oil was in the 20th century. And by calling it air, it makes it far more valuable to us than oil, on the basis that you literally cannot survive without air, whereas you could survive without oil. So let's just dwell on governance for a minute. What is data governance? Well, it's those rules that you put around data to make sure that it's used properly within your organization. So it's policies, procedures, standards, roles within the organization. However, from my viewpoint, if this is what you think data governance is all about, then you've missed the point. Because in order to get the best out of data, you've got to get complete buy-in from your business and from those that work in it. You can put all the policies and procedures you like in place, but if people don't follow them, if the leaders don't ensure that they are enforced within the business, then you will not display good data governance, full stop. And the regulator has got heavier and heavier on this point. And here's a couple of headlines from the current sector risk profile. Now, if you go back over the last 6 years or so, every single year without exception, the word data has become more prevalent. But now what we're seeing is it's got its own section within the actual risk profile itself. And there are three component parts to that, 3.27 to 3.29 of the profile. And the first one says that accurate, up-to-date, complete and consistent data are fundamental for boards. So that effectively is saying that a board cannot do its job properly unless it has accurate, up-to-date and complete information to make based decisions upon. 3.28, boards must have assurance that data integrity is appropriately managed. So it's not enough for them to just see the numbers. They need to make sure as a board that they have the assurance that those numbers are accurate. And then last one, 3.29, accurate and timely data underpins our engagement with providers. Well, this effectively means that when they are making judgments about organizations, then they will base it on the accuracy of the information that they have. And the regulator has made it very, very clear in the last year that good quality, accurate data is the cornerstone on which every other form of compliance is based. So in essence, the message is completely clear. Boards need to seek that assurance and they need to do it now. And if they don't, and it's perceived that the information that they're using is not completely reliable, then you will see these organizations downgraded. If you look at the downgrades from the last 12 months, I think you'll find that pretty much everyone without exception was due to poor quality data or poor quality reporting. So it's absolutely fundamental. And having said that, you know, why should we even wonder about this? It's a complete no-brainer, you could argue. You know, if you were making decisions based on the lives of your customers in some cases, but the well-being of your customers and communities as well, you'd want to make sure that you are making those decisions based on fact. You know, would you prefer to be basing decisions on science or gut feeling? It's a no-brainer. So there are so many reasons why we should ensure that data is right at the top of the agenda when we're considering strategy and how we provide the best possible service that we can. You've also got the threat that poor data provides. Now, this particular slide is, and you'll see a statement on the right-hand side here, was a statement released by the chair of board, the large housing association in the Midlands, where they effectively had a wholesale change in their executive team and many members of their board due to a health and safety related data issue. So we are talking about here that if the data is wrong and it can't be relied upon and it ends up costing a life, which is a dreadful, dreadful thing, then you know, is it that that's going to take organizations to take data seriously? In some cases, unfortunately, it is. We're also seeing a lot of headlines at the moment. If we look back over the last year, this is just some of the headlines that we've seen. You know, we have some fairly serious stuff here. You know, that the regulator received 597 consumer regulation referrals back in 2019-20, and that was up 19% from the previous year. So these are the kind of things that we're dealing with. We've also got a cyber scam here that cost an organisation over £1 million. You know, very serious problems that can absolutely transform the fortunes of social housing providers. And the last one you'll see there is Fiona McGregor, the CEO of the regulator, and she's stressing in this article that a very much more proactive approach has got to be taken to data management, and that they will be looking at this within their various decisions on downgrades. So again, the answer is clear for us all to see. You know, action needs to be taken on this, and the action needs to be taken now. But it's not straightforward. You know, we have a whole myriad of different legacy systems that we're dealing with, many of which are not making it easy to get data from, and those that exist will often have other systems related to them which which don't integrate properly and make it very difficult. There's spreadsheets all over many, that are relied upon by many social housing providers, and all of these things can hold absolutely critical data. We also, as senior teams, don't necessarily have the right people at the very top who respect that data. We're seeing large turnover in data staff, and it's not isolated. It's agreed literally by organisations length and breadth, as far as I've heard, that holding on to good data people is very, very difficult. So having those skills in house to deal with this is a problem. And then you've got the fact that we know we have an issue, and I think most social housing providers know they have a data issue, but they just don't know where to start. And therefore, they will ignore it. It's easier sometimes to do that. But blissful ignorance is no excuse. And when the time comes and there are problems, then these people are going to have to be held accountable for it. So we have some fairly significant challenges to overcome. And when it comes to good governance, the decisions will be made based on that data, not on the expert reassurances that we might provide. This is on the basis those reassurances have far too often in the past proved unreliable. So we're reaching a stage now where the regulator is actually saying, prove it. And that's the challenge going out to senior management teams. And we need to be ready for that. You've then got our strategic drivers as a sector. And data is just fundamental to those. If you look at any one of these areas, so the social housing white paper, it's all about knowing your customers better, about giving them better information, and the only way you can do that is by having great data. You've got the NHF Code of Governance 2020. Now, bizarrely, that doesn't mention data anywhere within it, and yet its requirements are all based on providing information and having access to information. So data is absolutely fundamental to it. You then have the building safety bill that's coming through. Again, it's seeking reassurance that information is in place to ensure that buildings are safe for people to live in. Not much to ask, really, you would hope. But you then have the ITV News out there who are making it quite clear that many social landlords haven't got an angle on this. And I've got to admit, I'm rather amazed the number of headlines, and by headlines I mean the first thing that they talk about when ITV News comes on at 10 o'clock is often, certainly every few weeks or so, something to do with the condition of social housing. So it's getting a lot of headlines at the moment. And then lastly, I'll also mention cybersecurity, because for many of us it's a real concern. We need to keep our data safe. We need to make sure our staff know how to not just manage the data, but to keep it secure. So another fundamental area of data management that needs to be looked after properly. Another angle on data, which is probably the one we should be focusing on, is return on investment. So this report by Forrester, which I would recommend to you all if you're looking for building your business case for more investment in data, is worth having a look at. There's a link to the report on this slide, although I doubt you'll be able to click on it, so we can put that link in the chat or email it later. But effectively, it's saying that on average, it believes that there's a 4.4 times return on investment for anything that's any investment that's placed in improving data management. And that shouldn't surprise us when we think about it, because of course if you've got good data at your fingertips, you can make better decisions. You can fix things faster. You can identify the customers that need your help and let the others look after themselves. You can spot those that may be having trouble with paying their rent You know, these are the kind of things that will make organisations much more efficient, and providing services that represent far greater value for money. And what this report also says is the sooner you get on and do it, the better, because if you let it drag, then that return on investment will be far less. And let's be honest with you, most other sectors have had to embrace it much earlier in order to survive. We have been pretty lucky in the social housing sector that where competition hasn't meant that we've had to try and use data to purely to survive, like we've seen perhaps in retail. But that's no reason why we shouldn't be giving it all the respect it deserves now. We as a sector are now looking for that guidance, and this is something that I'll share with you now. There's a group of us, and I'll show you it on the next slide, that have got together to look at how we can create a framework for social housing. The government have produced one. The Office of National Statistics were tasked with rolling it out across the government, and this is in process at the moment. They are actively talking to the MHCLG, so that's the group within which the housing regulator is a part, and it's all about improving the maturity of data within an organisation. This isn't something that's going to happen overnight. This is a journey, but effectively, if you look at the sector at the moment, there's a tremendous number of organisations that, if they were to categorise themselves on this journey, they would probably come out at about the emerging level, maybe learning, but very few more than that. And what the framework purely does is it gives you the rules to follow, if you like, in order to improve your maturity. And it's designed to be a gold standard for the sector in how to take that journey. So you've got a couple of key components to it. You've got data quality improvements, and you've got user needs assessments. So if I try to break this down, something we can all understand probably more easily, for me, there are two key components. There is having someone within the business who is accountable, supported by the leadership, and there is having some form of tooling available that allows you to keep your finger on the pulse with regards to your data, and that will alert you should things start to go wrong. I mentioned that the group that's come together. This is the group of organisations that comprises some of the leading kind of what you might consider data experts within the sector. Housmark is, of course, there, as well as Hacked and some others. I mentioned the Office of National Statistics because they're the organisation tasked with the job of putting the framework in place by the government. So we've all come together to create this framework, and we're at a relatively good stage now. I'm hoping that by the beginning of next year we'll have something that will be published. So I'm going to now hand over to Nicky, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the data landscape out there. Nicky, can you just let me know next slide when you need it?
Okay, that's fine. Next slide then. A fundamental place that everybody needs to start is to understand their data landscape, and most organisations would say that they've got a good idea of what they've got and where that data is held. But actually, when you dig under the bonnet, there's more to it than meets the eye. So what data do you actually have access to often amounts to more than you've actually got within your organisation. You'll find there are pockets of the business that actually use information being provided by others as well that actually contribute to your own interpretation of data. So you might have information sharing arrangements with your local council or with the police or something like that. And also where this information is stored and held. You know, a fundamental part of data governance is making sure the information is secure and only accessible to the people who actually need it. How does the data integrate if you've got data in lots of different places? For example, quite often people will have a separate asset management system to a housing management system, and they might have the same data being held in both. So what's the relationship between that data, and what business processes are actually keeping it up to date and making sure it's of value to the organisation? And when you've got that situation, what is the single version of the truth, basically? So knowing your data landscape well is a fundamental part. Next slide, please. In terms of data, there's obviously all sorts of information. So people tend to think of the structured data within the organisation, which from a Gartner perspective, that's probably amounting to about 20% of the data that you have within your enterprise. But it is the fundamental thing that everybody will focus on when they start thinking about their data landscape. And actually, there'll be data that is held in so many other ways. I suspect if I asked you all on this call, you would say that you have an element of spreadsheet anarchy within your organisation, and data being held, being extracted from other systems, held, manipulated, copies of that data held everywhere, people having different versions of it as well. So understanding where all that data is held is going to help you to actually bring good data governance to the organisation. And unstructured data is a minefield in itself. So things like emails, where you've actually got emailed information from tenants to tenants, between yourselves about tenants, but it's all information that actually you should have a handle on and be using appropriately and being able to access appropriately. Lots of people are implementing SharePoint if they haven't already, using OneDrive. Some people use other proprietary file systems, things like Dropbox. But all of this data amounts to your whole data landscape, and actually getting to a point where you've got a nice information architecture diagram that shows you where your data is and how the data is flowing in the organisation is fundamental to making sure that your data is of good quality and of use to the business. Next, please, Colin. Data integration is a really big part of this. Often data is held in more than one place, whether that's by design or by accident. And it's really important to be able to identify which is the single source of the truth within the organisation. So we've recently worked with an organisation where they use a housing management system and an asset management system. So this is a real prime example. The number of bedrooms field in the housing management system is obviously a numerical number. In the asset management system, there's a descriptive field that says how many bedrooms a property has. And actually, in this organisation, 3% of their properties had a differing number of bedrooms between those two systems. Now, if you're the asset manager, by default, you will use your asset management system to provide information and reports to the business. And if you're the housing manager, you may well use the housing management system. And you get two different numbers. And that is really difficult to explain to a board, to executive team, to anybody really. So understanding data integration, how you manage to keep those things in sync, and which is the single version of the truth, is really important. Next, please, Colin. So how do you go about improving data management? So bringing rigor and best practice to data management involves a number of areas. So the establishment of procedures and policies is a fundamental part of that, to bring best practice to an organisation. Making sure your data is secure is probably the number one, but making sure also that your data is compliant externally to things like GDPR or PCI legislation. Obviously, it's something you have to do. Internal compliance with business rules is perhaps sometimes skipped over. So, for example, in a housing management or asset management system, you might, as a business, have decided that these fundamental property attributes must be present for every single property, but there's no way of monitoring that within the asset management system, but you need to somehow make sure that those fields are all filled in. A good example of where this would be absolutely awful if it was wrong is if there's a property with a gas appliance, but the gas appliance isn't actually identified within the asset management system. And believe it or not, we've had instances of that within an organisation where there have been gas appliances, but they haven't actually been identified properly, or they have on one system and not on another. So it can be really important to try and enforce those business rules that you might have, because ultimately most housing managements or proprietary application software won't have the ability to build in all of the rules that you need in order to make sure your data is okay. What's often missing is, even if you have procedures in place to actually deal with these issues, audits of that and making sure it actually happens and people are following procedures and policies just don't very often take place. Next please, Colin. So these are some examples of policies that you would typically see within an organisation, and a lot of you on the call have probably got a majority of these. But there are some ancillary policies that perhaps sometimes aren't always addressed and audited. So things like data retention for different parts of the data landscape within your organisation, data protection, people focus on that, you tend to see that. Classification of confidential information, you don't always see that within an organisation. So whether information and data you have is confidential to your business, a particular part of your business, or an individual within the business, how do you classify all of the data that you have access to, and making sure that the right processes are followed for the right type of data you have. Bring your own device, you see more and more of that. It exposes your organisation's data to many more risks, which have to be managed. Things like encryption and backup are often there. They're often the first things that have been put in place before all the legislation around the actual data content. So there's a number of policies you would expect to see. What is hard is that actually enforcing them and making sure they are being followed can be really difficult. And the more you can automate the management of these policies and the implementation, the better. Next, please, Colin. The same could be said of procedures. So these are basically how to do some of the things that are being required of you in the policies. So how to change your password, how to classify data, how to encrypt data if you are sending it externally, how to log a data incident. Quite often data incidents aren't logged within an organisation, but they should be. How to satisfy a subject access request if you have one. And also the procedures you build up around your application use. So how to create a new property on a housing management system, what fields should you populate with what fields? And again, automating the management of this and making sure things are happening is key to actually helping you to improve in this area. Next please, Colin. Of course, all of this is difficult to do if you don't have the right culture within the organisation, and this is really can be one of the hardest bits to achieve. Everybody needs to understand the role that they play in implementing your data governance and your data strategy. The most important thing, in my opinion, is that you have a commitment from the exec team and the board. Because if you haven't got that executive level of sponsorship with your data governance and data strategy, it can be really, really hard to get the resources you need, the buy-in within the organisation, and for this to actually be successful. Everybody needs to understand they play a part, and that can be really hard to bring people along. But if people understand the fundamental objective of all of this is to make better business-based decisions, to better serve tenants, to better serve the business in its entirety, if you can translate that into outcomes for individuals or individual teams, that can actually help with the buy-in. Get in front of people and show them what a difference it can make to them and their part of the business, and you're part way there to actually helping people along the way. In a previous role, I worked at implementing ISO 27001, which is an information management system for an organisation. And to start off with, it was very difficult because it was bringing new policies, new procedures to an organisation that already thought that they were pretty good. But actually, part of implementing that system began to highlight the areas where we could get better. actually convincing people that more policies, more procedures, more red tape, in their view, was actually going to be a benefit to the organisation was really difficult. And we took it very slowly and dealt with individual instances on an individual basis. And 2 years on from the implementation initially, the tables turned all of a sudden, and a lot of the business were actually starting to take ownership of data in their particular area. And if things went wrong, if there were incidences where procedures, policies weren't being followed and there was data issues, they would actually come and almost confess. And it almost became a pride that they were actually part of the solution to actually making things better within the organisation. But it was difficult to do, I have to say. Next slide. I think there are 3 fundamental roles. I've not assigned job titles to these because the role can be subsumed into a person's existing role, or they may well be in larger organisations, particular people with a particular role and hence a particular job title. So the data champion within an organisation tends to be an identified executive, tends to be wherever IT would reside within a social housing organisation, or in some cases you may well have a chief information officer. So depending on the size of the organisation depends on how this role would be fulfilled. They're really responsible for ensuring that the policies on data management are in line with legislation and the business objectives. So the fundamental top level, and also responsible for reporting to boards and exec team on what's actually happening in the arena of data management. Next slide. The data manager. So occasionally you get a data manager. Quite often it's aligned with IT, so it might well be a head of IT. It might sometimes be at a higher level, FD, but the data manager is the person who is responsible for developing and maintaining data policies and other related documentation, like information architecture or a data dictionary. And also that person is responsible for directing the development and the guidelines of data standards and how things will be done within the organisation. And they would also be responsible for appointing and monitoring the performance of data owners, which is our next slide. Thanks, Colin. So data stewards or data owners, these are the people within the organisation who are responsible for making sure that the policies and procedures are followed in their area and the data sets in their ownership. This is, again, implemented in different ways in organisations. Sometimes you have them aligned with the application concerned. Problem with that is you may find things fall between the gaps. It might be by functional areas, so it might be by asset management, finance team. And often these are people who have some other job within the organisation, but have expressed some sort of interest or an awareness of the importance of data within their area. And the data stewards and the data managers together would quite often meet as a group on a regular basis to talk about issues and to talk about developments, different ways of doing things, how we can make this better. Next slide, please. So I've referenced it a couple of times, but it's really, really hard to do this and then keep it up, basically. And again, you need to make this as efficient a process as possible. What frustrates me is the number of organisations where they've undergone a data quality initiative. They're very proud and all their dates of birth are right now, and they haven't got any tenants who are less than 16, and they haven't got 200-year-old people living in their properties. Everything has been sorted. So it's a tick in the box on the list. We have sorted dates of birth, for example, and dates of death. The next day, after that ticks in the box, it can go wrong, and it will go wrong, because at the end of the day, data is, in a lot of situations, actually input by people, and it could just be finger trouble, it could be anything. But it's really hard in a lot of housing systems and other applications to build in all the validation you need against the data as it goes in. So you need something to help you. Once you've got that tick in the box, what's going to maintain the tick in the box and it's not going to disappear? So there are a number of tools that are available within many different sectors, and there are some that we've come across as well within the housing sector. But what should they do? One of the things is you want all of that data in your data landscape that you've discovered to actually be pulled together. So you've got a collection of all of the data within the organisation that you can then use for multiple purposes. It will enable you to do some discovery of data using a search across all of your data. It should also automate monitoring of data for data quality. So there should be the ability to actually define rules, and then if data quality breaks the rules, that you are alerted in some way so that you can immediately deal with it. Also, as well as automating for quality, you should be automating for compliance as well. So are your data retention policies being followed? Is their personal data being held in a place it shouldn't be held? Do people have access to it that shouldn't have access? Things like child information. If you're holding child information somewhere, you should have permission to be able to hold that. Where is it within the data estate? You know, if you've got multiple copies of birth certificates, for example, that you've kept, or passports that you don't need anymore. So automating compliance and automating data quality are two massive areas that a tool should help you with. And if data subject access requests are a problem to you, or anything where you're being asked to provide data on an individual, then if it's a problem to the organisation, the tool should also enable you to search across your whole data estate, including unstructured data, including things like emails, Word documents, to find anything that you hold on an individually. Next slide, please.
I was going to jump in here, wasn't I,
You were?
Nicky? So I'll start with a bit of a prediction, and that is that I believe that every social housing provider at some point in the next few years will have some form of tool that's going to automate data quality. It's fundamental, really, to allowing you to demonstrate great data governance. You know, a tool that never sleeps, that looks at your data 24/7 and alerts you if things start to go astray. It's hugely important in the toolbox. I think also if you're trying to achieve culture change, you know, there will always be those within your organization that will struggle, and to have something that alerts you as to when a little bit more development maybe is required or support, I think is hugely valuable. There are a number of proven solutions on the market at the moment. There's three I'm just going to pull up here. Now, the reason I picked up these three is because all of them have got a proven track record within the social housing sector. 3C have been providing data services for a decade, and we started using one of these automated tools 18 months ago. We've called it Data Logic, which is based on the Infobos engine, and that has just revolutionized the way in which we provide our services, the way in which we can support data migrations and data quality checks and data discovery. It's just changed the whole landscape for us. Interzeta is another very good solution. One of the things I think they do very well is they've got an ROI engine within their solution, so that gives an indication. It's only an indication of what the cost improvement or the savings might be from improving data quality. And another is Housmark. Again, both Interzeta and Housmark come from the health sector, from the NHS. It's where they've kind of got their primary customer bases currently. Housmark are working with a couple of very large housing associations in the Midlands, and you know, one of the comments I've heard made there is that Housmark is allowing them to, at a push of a button, produce their returns. So, you know, there's a huge amount of time saving and resource saving when it comes to reporting, if you can get your data automated and produced produced in a very much more reliable way. So hand back to you again, Nicky.
We've done some work with Westwood Housing Group down in the southwest, and I just wanted to talk a bit about what we did there. Next slide, Colin. So this is a quote from their chief exec, who, based on the roles that I talked about earlier, she is the data champion within Westwood. So already within Westwood, there was somebody at a high level who understood the importance of data to the organisation. And that really was the main catalyst for the change that they have undergone. Next, please, Colin. So they sought our guidance initially to look at data governance within the organisation and a data strategy and how they could improve things. But their fundamental thing was they wanted to automate the quality assurance of their data to make sure that the things they had already started to do around data, excuse me, could actually be maintained. Mick Capern, who's their Assistant Director of Transformation, called this turning off the data tap. So basically stopping poor quality data entering the data estate. So the business analysts that they had focused more on actually producing insight and analysis from the information rather than having to manage what was a growing list of exception reports to firefight data quality issues. And we've actually achieved that with them. Since that initial piece of work, we've completed a program and we continue to help them with data cleansing, bringing it to more aspects of the business, not just housing data, so financial data, HR data, data across the whole data estate. And we've also helped them with revising their data standards, developing the data dictionary with them, and introducing new data governance arrangements to actually help to improve data quality. Next slide, please, Colin. So automatically creating a data dictionary, that's quite a thing to do. But one of the tools we used, which was 3C data logic, one of the features in there is as the data is being pulled in from source systems, it can categorize the data into the system it came from, the table or the entity that it's in, what the actual field data is. And within some of these tools, you can actually then define what the validation should be against the individual fields that there are within the system. Also, you can map in some of these tools to data standards that already exist. So the HACT standard, for example, or the Microsoft standard, or you might have your own internal data standard that you already have. But it helps you to manage and maintain a data dictionary. And it is the place you go to understand what a field is trying to tell you. I was a director at a medium-sized housing association in the Midlands at one point, and when we used to have our exec team meetings, we used to talk more in our performance information meetings about what the data actually was and whether it included something or didn't include something, etc., than we did about what the data was actually telling us. So this removes the need if you have a good data dictionary. Next slide, please. Automatic alerting, a definite for me. It's something that you need within an organisation. If you're going to take this seriously, it's got to be an ongoing thing. It's got to be something that's going to help you and to alert you when things are going wrong, rather than you having to search for these things that are happening. Next, please, Colin. Integration. We've seen lots of incidences of this where the same data held in different systems is a different value. It can be something as simple as a postcode, or perhaps the title that a person has, or it can be something that's really important. Things like the number of bedrooms in a property, how many garage parking spaces have we got, where is that definitive information? And anything that you put in place to actually manage this must be really, really precise and definitive about where you go for different parts of information. To the extent that perhaps you might decide, well, the number of bedrooms that a building has, we're always going to take it from the asset management system, in which case You won't actually stop people looking in the wrong place for things, but what you can do is make sure that the number of properties in the asset management system is used as the source information to populate that information wherever else it might be held and accessed from the business. So integration is really important. Next one, please. Standardizing. So linking your data dictionary to things like HACT is going to help enormously. It's becoming widely recognised within the sector as telling you what the contents of fields should be and what you should be actually capturing. Next, please, Colin. Whatever you do to your data, this is the end result, what people actually see. So everything that's gone before is all the groundwork you actually do in order to provide the intelligence and the insight to the organisation that you need. So the ability to use the data that you've cleansed in effect in your data estate properly, then having a good business intelligence tool that sits on the top is great. And a lot of the tools that we've talked about, they actually have integration with existing reporting systems. So if you use things like Power BI or Click, then these can often integrate back into the tool that is helping you to actually maintain and marshal your data. Next, please. This is an example dashboard that shows you some data quality dimensions for tenant information. So things like whether dates of birth are suspect, how many postcodes you've got missing, and also can help to show you and display to the organisation the outputs that the data quality initiative you might have are bringing to the organisation. If you're using something that's automated, most of these systems keep a history of the data as it was and as it is now, and can actually show you the transformation that's happening in the business, and can also help you to monitor that things are being maintained or improved all of the time. Okay, back to you, Colin.
Back to me just to finish off. I'll keep it relatively swift now. I think when we look at some of the challenges we have, I mentioned earlier that the sector's having real trouble holding on to good data people at the moment. I think there's a number of reasons why. Sometimes these data people don't feel valued. They don't feel that the organisation is committed to data. They feel that they spend half their time actually sorting out data problems before they can actually do anything insightful with it. So I say length and breadth of the land, really, I'm hearing these issues. If we look at the journey you've got to take in order to get your data right and govern it properly within the business, these are the kind of 3 stages I tend to think of. We're actually putting the strategy together and then making sure it's implemented properly, and once it's in, having the assurance that it continues to operate properly. And you need to decide 2 things really. One, do you have the skills and the resources to do it in-house? And 2, if there's a need for any external assurance. I mean, particularly if you're looking at boards seeking your reassurance, or that the data that they're working with and making decisions on is accurate, then sometimes it's good to have a third party view, if you like, a rubber stamp to say yes, this information is good. And as I say, that you therefore have an opportunity to do it in-house, and I'm a little bit biased here, I got to accept, or whether to seek some external support. Just what are the pros and cons of outsourcing? Now, I'll start with a con, because one of the problems when you outsource is that social housing providers don't generally pay VAT, and therefore if you outsource a skill rather than do it in-house, you've got 20% VAT to add to the cost, which can be significant in the great scheme of things. Having said that, if you look at the benefits of outsourcing, provided you find yourself a good partner, you can have a tremendous saving in management time. actually looking after those individuals and keeping them motivated. It can be very much more flexible in that you can turn the resource on and off as it's required. You don't have to worry so much about the training because that's the responsibility of the outsource partner. And with regards to recruiting, it's their problem, not yours. It can cost a lot of money to recruit the right person, and if it doesn't work out, then that money's been wasted. You generally also have, with an outsourced arrangement, cover should someone leave or be sick for whatever reason. Then they have a responsibility to provide resource to provide you with cover. And if that individual is part of a wider team, then you will also have access to a tremendous amount more information and expertise from across that team that can be drawn upon to support that individual. So from an assurance perspective, you've got yourself dare I say it, someone to blame and someone to point at if someone ever questions that and say, well, what more can we do? We're taking this support and advice from experts who have an extremely good reputation. So there are lots of reasons as to why. And if you look at the smaller social housing providers who play an enormously important part in this sector, I think there's over 1,000 of them with under 1,000 units. They can't afford high level data people, so that they are going to need to consider how they draw these skills and support requirements from alternative places. And there is an absolute need to do it. We need to make decisions based on good data. This is Charles Darwin, and he said it's not the strongest species that thrive nor the most intelligent, but the ones who are most responsive to change. And Nicky mentioned about sitting around the boardroom table and debating the quality of the information. That's just crazy. I can tell you, as someone who's sat at a boardroom table for a couple of decades, that some of the most stressful times in my career is when I'm trying to get decisions based on information that not only am I not confident in, but those around the table are questioning. It's hugely stressful, and it's something to be avoided. So just to finish, if you are trying to transform your business and you are trying to make it as efficient and as effective as possible, then it is fundamental you get your decisions right. Good data builds a culture where people can be confident in the decisions that they make and what they say. It empowers the decision makers across the organization to make the right decision. And it provides that kind of foundation on which change can be built, and the evidence to monitor that progress and celebrate, when things are achieved. So it's fundamental to the transformation program, and it's also fundamental to making sure you're running the business effectively. You get it right, you will protect your income streams, you will create efficiencies, you'll make your job of management easier, you'll make your team's job easier, and hence you'll improve the lives of your customers and your team. And on that basis, I would tend to agree with the government that data really should be considered the new air. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much to both Colin and Nicky. We're going to do a slight change around in things. I'm just aware it's 3 o'clock, and I know that a lot of people do end up with things back to back. But we do have a couple of questions I just want to flag to you both quickly first. So we're just going to go straight into that Q&A in the hope that the people who ask them are able to stay on and hear the answers. So one that's from Patricia says that we have a Microsoft E3 license with option to buy their e-discovery and other tools. Do you have a view on that?
Nicky, probably you're better qualified on this one.
Yeah, I think any of these tools are good at particular pieces of functionality, and it really does depend on what your prime objective is from a tool. So if it's for compliance purposes, if compliance is the key thing that you're after, that you want to improve within the organisation, one tool would be better than another. If it's data quality, another tool would be better than another. If it's to actually improve access to data for individuals throughout the business rather than just technical people, it would be something else. So they each have their place, in my view, but it does depend fundamentally on the driver for the organisation. What is the business objective that you're trying to achieve? And if you're trying to achieve all of those things, then my experience is you'll have to compromise on one area or another. These tools, some are better at one thing than another. So,
but I'd also add to that value for money.
yeah.
You know, the Microsoft tools are extremely good, and as you can probably imagine, particularly good when dealing with Microsoft products. But they're not cheap, so they come with a significant price tag. Whereas some of the other options available, which for me are much better across lots of different applications, including, you know, use with the Microsoft stack, and can represent much better value for money.
Just adding to that as well, most of these tools can connect to any type of source data. Microsoft, there are some issues with connecting to some other older technologies, which some organizations still have. So again, it depends on technically where you are as well.
That's brilliant. And well, I think I'm going to say this wrong, but a specific one. In terms of, has anybody used Atacama? Which I don't know if that's something that you guys have got anything to add to, or if that's just to people generally on the chat. Quite a specific one there.
I think Atacama is something you can buy in conjunction with Teradata. I've not seen it being used or heard of it being used within the social housing sector, and I don't know much about it.
Okay. Great. And just one final question that's come in. You mentioned, sort of touched about the need for that executive level sponsorship and buy-in. What can you do to get that? In terms, you know, if you just had to give someone an in a nutshell answer, in terms of sort of your top tip to secure that buy-in from the top level.
And we had this discussion earlier because it is a tricky one. When you have an organisation where they know they have data issues, one of the problems is that they're wary about you know, being forensic in case they find that the information they've been producing for a while is flawed, and that can be embarrassing and difficult, and I appreciate that. But as I say, it's no reason not to do it. I think you have to know your audience. You've got a finance director who's going to be looking at return on investment. You've got a chief exec and a board who are going to be extremely interested in compliance, and you probably will have various people within the organisation for where you know they would hate the embarrassment of finding that the information that they're providing is wrong. So you have to know your audience. Those are the three areas for me. They are risk, they are return on investment, and they are good working environment, if you like, looking after customers better, looking after your staff better. Those are the three areas of justification. All of them are extremely strong, all of them. The only issue you've got to overcome is fear itself of actually uncovering data issues that happened on your watch. And, you know, that's something that has to be overcome.
That's great. Thank you very much. And thank you to both Nicky for joining us today and to 3C for sponsoring our entire event series.